So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we find these layers very true. And the 61st chapter with chapter 1:8 gives us then the period of restoration, where then the holy cities return, and Ezekiel 37th chapter then is exercised, and the first and second sons then receive their authorities. But let's then make an evaluation of a situation very specific regarding then the Gentiles, regarding then the riches coming from the system of China, and the recognition of a covenant, the true covenant of the Second Tabernacle services and the First Tabernacle service. As we read from Daniel, starting then roughly on chapter number 11 and verse 34, there is a relationship with both covenants. As we understand from the holy instructions, there is only a covenant made with Ibrahim. However, when we study the completion of the first and initiation of the second, there is a relationship with the false Messiah. That's when we read then this relationship, and because of the riches involved, many will make decisions on obviously going after the false Messiah. But the most important situation is this: the recognition of an alien God. Let's then understand what this means. We do have the knowledge of 2 Corinthians 11:4 of any kind of a Savior not related with the instructions of Moses is a false Messiah. A wanderer in this world is only given to Nahashatan, or then Satan himself, and he is posing as then the Messiah, because he wanders in the earth as described in Job. So then, as then church obviously is a fraud, as you can understand, most of us are familiar with the story of the Titanic, the big ship. And let's then make a close evaluation of what went on with this ship. Truly it was not the Titanic, but its sister Olympic. So what went on then with the Olympic? Prior of the first voyage, the Olympic was involved with a wreck. HMS Hawk busted open the side of the Olympic, causing a very serious damage. As we can understand, the side of the ship was then bent, and the very structure of this ship, the Olympic, was compromised. And the company, White Star, at that time was investing a lot of money in this venture of ships, because they want to dominate the market, and they could not pay for the repair of this Olympic ship. So J.P. Morgan, very famous because of the Chase Bank, very reliable bank in fact, was involved with this company, and they themselves made the decision of, at some point, to change the names of the ships. Thus then the plan after the change was then to deliberately sink these Olympic, posing as Titanic, so then they would receive the insurance money and the entire payment, so then they were able to get rid of the ship. A fraud, a blunt scoundrel's fraud. Thousands and thousands and thousands of money was then granted. They were able to get 12 times 6 digits at that time. As we understand, people, they so think of Titanic, and truly was the Olympic, and images have shown the sign of then the ship, because they made a sign over the name Olympic. And at this very time, you can understand the wording, then Titanic is coming apart. Thus people can read the Olympic from behind it. As we can understand church, it is very similar as the Titanic ship posing. As we can understand, church is posing as the real truth, but truly isn't. Let's then read a section regarding this relationship of the first and second covenants and the influence of the false Savior, yet recognizing that there is an alien God. In these you find the 39th verse of the 11th chapter. Recognizing the fourth, or then the importance of the second tabernacle services, but they joined together for the purposes of deceit. You find in US and Israel not believers in the true Messiah, yet they didn't recognize the importance of second tabernacle services or tabernacling. But then, because of the riches of China, they recognized then an alien god known as the dragon. Let's then read a section of it. You find then 39th verse of the 11th chapter. Then he shalt honor with gold and silver and precious stones and desirable things, and he shalt then be himself a fort, not substituting, but because of deceit and the lust thereof, and shalt then acknowledge an alien god. We are speaking precisely as then the dragon, the Chinese dragon, because of its riches. Let's then understand, where do we get this layer from? You find then Babylon, when Babylon was then discovered and then went down, and the city of Babylon and the merchants of the earth and the merchandise, and then they were mocking at Babylon, or the system of confusion. We are speaking of a system of confusion. First tabernacle service is then obviously those unbelievers, those Hebrews unbelievers, joining up with United States as the false Messiah, thus making the confusion. And both of them recognizing then there is a true covenant of the second tabernacle services, however joining with a system of false and a system of deceit. They will obviously recognize themselves as then a fort, thus then lust, thus then the lady of revelation that sits on a dragon. These sections can give us very important clues of the relationship of the first and the second and the false Messiah. That's precisely what is taking place. You find in many places of the world the false Hebrews, or then the unbelievers, joining up with this kind of belief and wanting themselves to re-establish the system of sacrifices as it was during the time of the first tabernacle service. At the moment, the Levites in Israel, they are studying precisely those areas of sacrifices of the first tabernacle service. And truly it is an abomination. And the Messiah himself said in the 24th chapter of Mitzvah. But because they want what they want, then they are going to be joining with a false Messiah, as Israel and United States are joining up. Thus Gog and Magog. And both of them, as they do this for the purposes of deceit, on one side you can sin and do whatever you want because you are then saved. The other side because they want the laws of Moses. Each of them false, but there is a second tabernacle services where they do recognize that there is the law of Moses yet completed, and the holy cities representing the Messiah in the earth, saving the Gentiles. This is what we should believe. Yet the false unification of both of the first tabernacle service and the false Messiah, both of them recognize there is an alien God, and they will acknowledge him. Speaking of the dragon. So then, we do understand that the dragon must be the first, thus recognizing there is a system coming because we join then this acknowledgement as the increasing of knowledge spoken of by Daniel then in 12th chapter. This should give us then the relationship then in Revelation and the way they are going to be involved prior of the autumn feast. So then, these can give us more details on how to read then Revelation later on. Read it in sections of the 20th chapter and earlier, and then the spiritual side of this relationship of the first tabernacle service and the false Messiah. As church then is a fraud, a blunt, scoundrel's fraud, as we understand, the Vatican is bankrupt and they are rebuilding themselves. Yet China is bringing a new system of trade, and then later on the Vatican will get their share of riches because they will join with the unbelievers, the Hebrews unbelievers, and these fraudulent friendship will to bring them much wealth via the deceit, always recognizing the powerful country of China, the kingdom of the East. China won't be part of this system, but because the system is then used worldwide, then the false alliance is then giving us this section, so we can understand how to read Revelation later. So I'm going to explore more of Revelation linked with this layer of Daniel 11. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.